Now, United Nations officials say the humanitarian response must go hand in hand with longer-term recovery when it comes to dealing with events such as the recent earthquake and tsunami on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, which claimed around 2,000 lives last month. Much of the city of Palu was reduced to rubble, and the focus must now be on rebuilding. Well, with me now is Achim Steiner from the United Nations Development Programme, which he heads. Welcome to the programme, Achim. So tell us, how does that work? How does an organisation like yours deal with the longer-term reconstruction efforts when events like Palu and disasters like that happen?
Well, just like a national government, we in the United Nations also have two tracks of response: the emergency relief coordination and also the longer-term sustainable and development recovery work. Right now, these two are working side by side because clearly the focus right now is still on saving lives, finding missing people, providing emergency supplies. But at the same time, we have to help people reconstruct. That means getting the rubble out of the way, finding materials to rebuild houses. So a lot has to go also into building back better, because we don't want to expose people to the same risks again in the future.
Indeed. But we know these are very large, complex problems, certainly an ongoing urgent issue like the Rohingya crisis, which another UN agency has actually called a crime against humanity. How does the UNDP deal with such complex, large problems affecting thousands of people?
Well, first of all, by standing up for the fundamental rights that are enshrined in the human rights legislation that exists internationally, but also providing protection, for instance, to the 700,000 refugees that Bangladesh is currently hosting. At the same time, the High Commissioner for Refugees and the United Nations Development Programme have engaged with the government of Myanmar to do an assessment and to create the conditions where possible and deem them also either fit or not fit for people to begin returning. And this is currently work that is underway, and that we are very keen that with the government of Myanmar can be speeded up, because without that, the return is unlikely to happen.
All right. And we know that poverty, though, still remains crippling in many parts of Asia, particularly areas like Pakistan, Bangladesh. But there are some innovative projects as well in places like Bangladesh that you're helping with.
Well, we learned over the last few years that sometimes civil servants can be great visionaries. In an empathy training for civil service officials, one of them came up 8 years ago with an idea to try and make that distance that people have to travel to get their land records in order to sell a piece of land much easier. E-government, the new technologies, these digital platforms have now led to actually having access points all over the country where people have saved literally hundreds of millions of days that they would have spent traveling to a district capital or national capital. Many more services are being provided, and the Access to Information initiative in Bangladesh truly is an example of how poor people can benefit from digital platforms and far easier access.
Right. What about ongoing concerns, though, that obviously you're a part of the United Nations, the larger umbrella, that as an organisation it isn't very effective at addressing a lot of global problems because it's simply straddled with bureaucracy?
Well, first of all, we are an international organisation, we are an international civil service, so none of us are in denial that we also face some of the challenges that come with it. But I think these generic critiques sometimes also miss the point. The United Nations every day across the planet is part of keeping millions of people alive. In the emergency situations, be it like in Indonesia just now, I just spent 3 days in northeast Nigeria and Chad looking at the effects of civil war and terrorism, extremism, how it is affecting populations, how we can help to protect them, and also bring them back to a pathway where development actually becomes an option. We have literally thousands of colleagues across the world working on the front lines of development, humanitarian response, and I think these sort of generic accusations, deserve to be answered, but they are not the full truth nor the reality. And I think a more differentiated discussion will always take us closer to the truth and also remind people how important the work of the United Nations is when you are a victim of a natural disaster or a human rights crime or many other incidents where very often we might be the first responder or the last one to stay with you.
Right. And in terms of Asia, though, there are places that still need a lot of urgent help. What areas are you focused on?
Well, Asia is a continent of many different realities. So you have some of the most advanced nations here with extraordinary stories. We are sitting here in Singapore. It's a place where we, as UNDP, have a long history of cooperation, almost 60 years old, from the beginnings of this vision about the development of a city-state. But we also have still countries that have extreme poverty in very large numbers. We work with countries to try and bring national strategies. We accompany them. We also take best practices from here, share them in other parts of the world. And I think often we don't celebrate extraordinary breakthroughs. Reduction in extreme poverty in this region has been phenomenal in number terms. Not only China, India over 10 years has halved the number of extreme poor people. Over 270 million people lifted out of extreme poverty. These are extraordinary numbers, and we should look at them more closely because they actually demonstrate that development can work, good government policies can work, and we have every reason to believe that the Sustainable Development Goals are in fact a framework that can guide us into a more sustainable and equitable future.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your time with us. Achim Steiner there, the head of the UNDP.
Thank you.